Oh, you switch sides? Oh.
This is a meeting of the Finance Subcommittee. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Chairperson Nutter?
Present.
Mr. Dakota? Mr. Lay? Two present, one absent.
I'd also like to point out that school committee members Bob Hoey and Connie Martin are both here with us today, as is the Chief Financial Officer, Billy Joe Turner. The agenda items are to take a look at the end of last year, a report from the end of last year, and also to take a look at the first quarter of this year where it comes to spending. I would like to start first by saying that the fact that this school department finished in the black last year at all was a wonderful achievement into itself, considering what Ms. Turner and Superintendent Durkin had to deal with. The fact that we finished with, on paper, right around $54,000, not $855,000 as the CFO stated for the city. We finished with about 54, and of that, about 52 of that was invoices that were submitted late. So had they been submitted on time, we would have finished with about $2,000. And to run a budget of this size, that tightly, and to finish in the black, shows the great effort and the work done by Ms. Turner and former Superintendent Durkin. And I don't think people realize the amount of time, the amount of energy, the amount of sacrifice that these two women put forth for this city and for this school district. And they both need to be complimented for doing that. And with that, I'd like to turn over to Ms. Turner just to get a very brief synopsis of what we finished with last year and how we were able to end up in such a good position.
Last year, we completed the year with $166,687,000 of spending on the school committee side. The city spent $63,220,000. And as you explained, there was $54,000 left over, and $52,000 of that was bad bills that would have to be paid now. So the excess of revenue over expenditures for last year was $54,000. We did very well. As you explained, we did make a lot of sacrifices. We we did hiring freezes. We bartered between schools because we didn't have the funding to, continue with facilities improvement or buy more supplies. But we stayed within, like you said, we stayed in the black by making those changes. And now this year we're doing much better. So much more generous outlook.
Would you repeat again the amount that the city has to file a report with the state, correct?
Yes.
End of year report, and how much was their effort toward their required net school spending?
They spent they reported $63,220,000. Of that includes $22.6 million to the charter schools and $8.6 million to the vocational schools. So the $63 million is including non-net school spending items as well as net school spending eligible items.
So do we know what the net school spending amount is that the city spent?
Yes, that's tab 6. The net school spending eligible amount for the city was $47,903,000.
And of that $47 million, how much of that was in the form of a cash contribution?
$16 million. 15.7 and $16 million this year.
So just to be clear for those who are listening at home, you know, the city, by law, is allowed to charge back for items that they contribute to the school. Items such as the treasurer's office, picking up trash, the police officers, the school nurses, and they do that, and they spent, or they're taking credit for about $30 million. The city gives the school department about 33% of their required net school spending in the form of cash. The rest of it is in this form of chargebacks. Now, if you went back before the Education Reform Act, the city spent more in cash for the schools and could not back then deduct picking up the trash or having police officers or school nurses. That came about because of the Ed Reform Act. So I just want, you know, when you hear people, and this is me personally, I'm not speaking for my colleagues, this is me personally saying, when you hear, you know, the city saying that, you know, we've exceeded net school spending, a lot of it, in my opinion, is done on paper. It is not in the form of operational money for the budget. That's just my personal opinion. So regarding the close of last year, Mr. Dakota, do you have any questions or comments?
No, we just, this hit tonight, but I haven't had a chance to look at this in depth, so maybe at the next.
I just want to point something out. In preparation of tonight's meeting, the CFO has prepared quite the docket, giving us all sorts of numbers and breakdown, and I just want to, you know, tell you that we appreciate the time and the effort that went into this, and it is a lot of work. I did get a chance to review it briefly. There is a lot of good information in here, and that just needs to be looked at. But again, the job that you know, Superintendent Durkin and yourself especially did on getting us to finish the year in the black was just a phenomenal job, and everyone down there needs to be credited and thanked for doing such an outstanding job. Before we move on to this year, I'll ask my colleagues, Mr. Hoey or Ms. Martin, if they have anything they'd like to add. I told you this was going to be quick and painless. Moving on to this year, would you just like to give us a... Now, the good news this year is, as a lot of people know, the state was able to increase their Chapter 70 money, which is the money that we get from the state to basically run the school department here in the city. So I think we ended up with $13 million more than we had last year. $12 million more, thank you, than we had last year, which is a great increase. And we just found out yesterday and today that the state has also just passed another bill that overhauls the foundation formula. And again, Lowell is now going to be going forward in even better shape. But if you could just give us a brief summary of where we get, what we get this year, and how our budget is looking, especially in the key, we have some very key categories that we have to keep an eye on. Besides payroll, transportation, special education are the three biggest costs, I would say, in our budget. So if you could just give us kind of an overview of where we started, and after the first quarter, where we are in those three categories.
So it's our goal to regain solid financial footing by showing fiscal discipline even when we get $12 additional million. We want to make sure that anything we decide to spend through strategy is on sustainable cost. So with sustainable, a review of sustainability, and with planned efficiencies like rewriting the grants without the MTRS staff, we're looking like we're going to come well within budget. We're looking as though we could possibly start to replenish the depleted reserve accounts, our revolving accounts. If you think of a revolving account as if it's your savings account at home, we don't want to live paycheck to paycheck when you're at home. You need to have that savings account for when unexpected costs come up. Well, the school department, we have a lot of cost areas that are areas that we can have unexpected costs, like out-of-district tuition. We have homeless and DCF placements that come, there's no way for us to predict it or project it, so that's a high-risk area. Substitute usage, we never know what the attendance will be, so that's another high-risk area. Sick leave buyback, we never know how many people are going to retire in a given year, so that's a high-risk area. So we really do need to replenish these depleted accounts so that we have some wiggle room if they do come over, if the accounts are spent over what we had budgeted. So as far as the key areas that you just talked about, payroll shows a savings, a year-end savings because of vacancy savings. All of the new hires that we were going to hire, if someone came in 4 weeks after the approval, or, they have to give notice and things like that. So vacancy savings, and when staff resign and we replace them with a lower-paid younger person, we have payroll savings. I would normally say, let's figure out how we want to spend that, but we should not do that. Because again, fiscal discipline would demand that we watch the day-to-day subs. Day-to-day subs, I already show, if we continue on the trajectory that we're on right now, using the average weekly sub cost, we're going to be $300,000 or $400,000 short in that line. So the payroll savings would offset that. Out-of-district tuition right now, at this given time, we look like we would have some extra money in that account, because right now, it just so happens that there were less students than what we projected. But then today already, I found out of 2 more students coming in that could cost us $70,000 each. So again, that's just an example of how that could change quickly. Sick leave buyback. Currently, there's $915,000 of liability known. That means that that's how much we will pay out for the people that have already reported that they're going to retire. Last year, we had $700,000 in the account. We changed that and modified it to the 1.1, which is what historically has been budgeted. Thankfully, we did that because we spent $1.8 million in that account. So the fact that it's $915,000 right now with the $1.1 million means we have less than $200,000 wiggle room. If we spend what we spent just last year, if we think of historical comparisons, we would need several $100,000 more in this line. So again, that's an example of why we shouldn't take any known savings until we see all of this play out. And transportation, right now, we're okay. We budgeted enough for unexpected homeless students, things like that. So right now, I don't have a surplus or a deficit in those accounts. In that account.
When you talk about some of the revolving accounts and the fact that they were drawn down, I don't think people realize, how drawn down those accounts were. But at one point last April, I have an email from the city auditor because I had expressed some concerns about how drawn down we were. And the circuit breaker account at one point in April was down to 1 cent. Mm-hmm. And when I mentioned that to superintendents and other communities, they were baffled why we would ever allow that to get so low. So when we talk about the fact that these revolving accounts were drawn down, they were drawn down in a lot of cases to the barest of bones. And the philosophy that this school committee adopted with you and Mrs. Durkin, that has been carried forward by Superintendent Boyd, of being very, fiscally prudent and cautious, has paid off. We are looking like we are going to be in good shape, but as Superintendent Boyd and I were talking, I reminded him, this is only 1 quarter down. This is only November. We have a long way to go in the school year, and as you say, you could get one student that could come in and cost the district $700,000. It happens that way. We could have all of a sudden a huge increase in the price of gasoline or insurance, and that's going to affect transportation. So there, it's good that we are on a path like this. I noticed that when I was going to say the auditor, but we don't have an auditor in the city just yet, but the CFO did a quarterly report to the city council, and one of the things he mentioned when he ran the Munis report was that there are some line items that we have that show expenditures but no money there, and it has a zero balance, and it was up to us to fix that, which you just explained. I know I've asked you and you have explained it to me, but just for other people, I'd like that to be addressed, because it's not like we're running down when we don't have money, actually.
So the coding behind an accounting system should reflect the budget document itself. The Department of Ed gives us codes showing administration, instruction, things like that. When I run that Munis report, it should reflect what the budget document looks like. We're in the process of trying to clean up coding, so we may code an account and give that account number, and we haven't, say for instance, if we created it 2 weeks ago, but we had to wait and bring the transfer in front of you tonight, it would look as though there's a negative. But we're constantly reviewing the budget too to make sure that nothing is mischarged. If something's mischarged, there's a budget for it somewhere, and we would clean it up and make sure that it's fixed.
I think you've done an outstanding job with that and with cleaning that up, because I know we had, we had things budgeted. You bring in a transfer tonight to do a lot of that cleaning up. It's on tonight's agenda. There's a $3 million transfer, and people would look and go, wow, that seems like a whole lot of money to transfer. But when you look at the fact that what you're doing is just what you stated, you're transferring it into codes that have been put in, and taking positions that are actually at the schools and putting those people there instead of a lump sum, like the clerks, for example.
Right. And another example of that large transfer is this. Remember when I said how we're going to rewrite the grants, but without the MTRS staff? Because when you write a grant and you put in a teacher on there, you automatically pay a 9% fee. If you take the teacher off and put on a non-MTRS, which MTRS is the teacher retirement system, so if you put on a tutor instead, you no longer have to pay the 9% fee. So you free up $300,000 on one grant just from being creative with how you write the grant. That's what I mean when I say planned efficiencies. So when we did the budget, at that time, we didn't know what the allocations for the grants would be. We didn't know how we were going to rewrite it, so we left it vague. Now, after rewriting the grants, we took the social workers off the grants. The social workers are now on the local budget, so I have to find money and move it over to the social worker line. Same thing with paras and teachers. We took them off the grants, took the teachers off of the grant, put it on the local budget, took the paras off the local budget and put it on the grant. That causes a lot of moving around. So all of the transfers are just to clean house, to make it as user-friendly as possible so that you guys could look at the budget document and Munis document and see it side by side, and it would make sense.
Again, after reviewing the Munis report and our budget and the first quarter that has finished, as you say, with the ability to continue, as long as we do continue being as fiscally prudent and conservative as we have been, and cleaning it up, we have the ability to, not only finish the year again in the black, but hopefully next June, when you're doing your year-end presentation to the school committee, you'll be able to report to them that not only are we finishing with a little bit of money left, but we were able to replenish some of those accounts that were drained. And that is good financial practice and puts us in very good financial shape going forward.
I have to share an example of what it was like to operate a school district of $200 million without having any money in the savings accounts and the revolving account. In food service, when they make purchases, if you buy in bulk, you get much cheaper you get better discounts. We're accustomed to being able to make purchases for 2 months of a certain product if it's a non-perishable. When we had $0 in the account, we could no longer purchase the way we had in the past because there was no cash in the account. So when we would go to make a purchase, there was no cash. So we would have to minimize just to get through. So just think of it as a household. You can't go food shopping for the week because you don't have enough money for the week. You have to do it day by day. That's how we were operating last year with the food service account. And that's why it's so imperative that we replenish the accounts. And just as a clarification, if we have any money left over in the general fund in what's known as the local accounts, that goes back to the city. So I try my best not to have a surplus in that line. If I know that we have $5,000, I would spend the $5,000. The way the $2,000 surplus would have resulted is if there was a $100 purchase order and the bill came in for $90 because there was a discount applied, then that $10 goes back onto the purchase order and comes back in. So otherwise, I would have used the $2,000 too. But like I said, any known surpluses that we had, we would find a way we would minimize what we transfer over to the circuit breaker or to the food service line so that those accounts grow and not the surplus go to the city, if that makes sense.
You know, one of the things that I think we need to also keep in mind was the state passed a law, I want to say 3 years ago now, and the city also accepted it, where I believe we formed an account for it's almost like a special education reserve fund. To my knowledge, we have never been able to be in a point that we've put any money into that. If we do get to a point where we can put money into it, before that money can be spent, it actually has to be approved by both the city council and the school committee. But it is a tool that's there because of we don't know from year to year about special ed cost. So if we do have an opportunity and are able to take money and put it into that account, then again, that's something that we should look at because as we know, we could get an influx of students and all of a sudden our out of district and our transportation for out of district just goes through the roof. So it's just something that I was reminded of recently, and I just wanted to remind us that we do have that ability.
Okay.
Mr. Dakota?
I was going to ask before we actually adjourned was to also comment on the Herculean effort that you and Ms. Durkin did over the course of last year. It was just amazing to see how much work you both put in on our behalf and on our children's behalf. And so again, thank you so much for that.
I'll ask either of my colleagues. Nothing? See, I told you this was going to be nice and easy. A motion to adjourn, Mr. Dakota? Seconded by Mr. Nutter. Thank you very much.